Hey guys, so it's 4:36 in the morning and I've been studying murmurs and I looked all over the internet to try and understand it, and it's taken me almost 2-3 hours. And so I'm going to attempt to explain it in a very simple way. Starting with a basic heart diagram. Oxygenated blood goes from the left atrium to the left ventricle and going to the body. So the way to remember that is just have body on the right, okay? That's connected to the body, and then that's connected to the lungs, alright? Very simple. And then this one crisscrosses, if you will. Okay. Now, one thing to remember is this is the aorta, and just remember that this is red, right? So blood's going in aorta. And the other thing to remember is that if you look in your hand, there's something blue, and that's a vein. Okay, everyone knows that vein has deoxygenated blood, but in the heart it's actually opposite. So if this is red, it's an actual vein. So pulmonary, because it's coming from the lungs, pulmonary vein. That's not how you spell pulmonary, but anyway. Okay, and then if that's a pulmonary vein, then this must be the pulmonary artery. All right, and then what else am I missing there? The SVC, superior vena cava. Anyway, that's just to recap your knowledge on the heart. The heart, just assume this is the right portion, which we're not going to focus on. We're going to focus on the left. So this is the left atrium and the left ventricle. All right. Now, what I want you to also note is obviously this is the aorta. Okay, this is here the mitral valve. Right. Now, so we got that intact. Okay, obviously the mitral valve looks like this, but we're going to go through that. Also, I wanted to mention is that when this happens, it's called. So in better terms, diastole is filling of the blood, while systole is the contraction and emptying the blood. And you can see in the diagrams on your left, diastole is filling, the blood's going to the left ventricle, and systole is contracting. I'm just coming back to the basic in case anyone has forgotten that or didn't know about it or anything like that. Now, this is where it gets real. Okay, now we're going to start about murmurs. When you have systole, so contraction of the ventricle, when you have systole, what happens, easy way to remember it, is basically blood's going to push that way and blood's going to push that way because you're contracting this, there's pressure here. Okay, so if there's pressure here, then blood has to go up or has to go down. That's only two. So in systole, what do we get? Okay, mitral is going backwards, so it has to be mitral regurgitation. Very simple. Okay, in systole, the blood's going this way, so it has to be aortic stenosis because the blood's going in the right way. But what's happening is that something called stenosis. So it's a narrowing of the aorta. So it's called aortic stenosis. Let's see. Diastole is the opposite. What do you have? If this had you have mitral regurg, then this one you had mitral stenosis. If this one you had aortic stenosis, what do you have? You have aortic regurg. The blood's going that way. Alright? So you have mitral regurg. Now something to understand. Okay, so this is systolic, this is diastolic, because the S1 is the closing of the AV valve, and the S2 is the closing of the aortic, aortic valve, or the semilunar valve, okay, which is this. Now, in systole, what's happening is that the left ventricle is contracting, so this part is contracting, okay. Now, when this part is contracting, we said you get mitral regurg. Mitral regurg is the blood going back to the left atrium, and what actually happens is that the AV valve doesn't close properly, so blood just pushes up here. Okay. Now, as you can see, there's no resistance, there's no stenosis, there's no narrowing, blood is just moving up. Okay, and there's nothing that's stopping it because the pressure here is obviously greater than the pressure here. So nothing is stopping it. So what do you get? You get a murmur, and it's basically a pansystolic murmur. Very simple. Why? Because there's nothing stopping it. Okay, so it doesn't. The shape of it is just pansystolic or holosystolic. So in mitral regurg, we have a pansystolic murmur. Now, where do you hear it? Where do you hear it the most? You obviously hear it in the mitral place. Okay, so you hear it. By the way, this is the places where you hear. All physicians take money if you forget. Okay, and so if you have a mitral regurg, so you'd hear it in the mitral area, or otherwise known as the apex. You might see it in the exams known as apex. So it's heard there, and it radiates. Obviously, we said the blood's moving up, right? So it radiates all the way up to the axilla. So you can also hear it in the axilla. Okay, so it radiates to the axilla. Okay, so here in my table, I have mitral regurgitation is pansystolic, heard best at the apex, radiates to the axilla. That's what it looks like, and we explained why. Now, there's something called a prolapse. Okay, so back to the whiteboard. There's something called a prolapse. What is a prolapse? The prolapse is actually the mitral valve has prolapsed in the atrium. And here you have the chordae tendinate. It's basically fallen in the atrium, and it's pushed back. Now, what happens when you get systole? The pressure again is the same thing, nothing changes. The pressure is greater here, and what you have is the blood pushing up on the chordae tendineae. Now, because the chordae tendineae is stretched so much, what happens is it basically tenses up and it forms a click. It forms a click, and that click, I'm just going to rub this. That click is represented by this line because it happens in the mid-systolic. Okay, mid-systolic. Maybe if I should draw it in the middle, probably better. Round about there, it's called mid-systolic click, and the same thing could also happen where you get a regurgitation of the blood. So if the mitral valve, because the pressure is so great, the mitral valve actually opens a little bit. Okay, so the pressure goes up, and so you get the same thing, a pansystolic murmur. But this time it's not pansystolic the whole way. It's only it's a late systolic murmur. Late systolic murmur. This is actually known as a mid-systolic non-ejection click, and the reason why it's non-ejection is because ejection refers to the blood going in that direction. It's ejecting. So for example, you have here, we'll discuss it later, it's ejecting, and that's going in the right direction. It's ejecting to the aorta, but this one's going the wrong way, so it's a non-ejecting click plus a late systolic murmur. Okay, instead of a pansystolic, because pan goes the whole way. This is not pan because of the click. All right, so we move on to our table. As I said, a prolapse or a mitral prolapse is a non-ejection mid-diastolic click, which we mentioned by that, and a late systolic murmur. Okay, perfect. So we're talking about aortic stenosis here. So there is a stenosing, a narrowing here. In systole, basically the blood comes this way. Okay, and because there is the stenosis, what happens is, and the pressure is great here, what happens is that the blood actually starts, okay, we're talking about systole, the blood starts slow and then gets higher and then goes back down. So my drawing is not the best, but it looks like a diamond shape, and that shape is called crescendo, decrescendo. So that's what the murmur is called. Very simple, crescendo, decrescendo shape. Now, what I also want to mention is that some books don't really mention this, but what happens is because it's a stenosis, okay, you get some sort of click as soon as the blood comes. So we draw that by an ejection click. Ejection click, because there's like a narrowing. So when the blood moves, it goes cluck, like it clicks, you know, and so that's what we call it by ejection click. So we'll move back to our table, which we summarized: aortic stenosis, crescendo decrescendo shape, ejection click. So I should draw that ejection click. Some people start drawing the crescendo decrescendo shape after the click. Some people just show the click. Heard most loudly in the aortic area, which makes sense, the upper sternal area. If we move to here, the aortic area is here. Remember, my diagram shows the aorta being here, right? But obviously, if you look at the real heart, it goes up here, but I just made it for simplistic. So the aorta is here, and where does it radiate? Well, if there's an aortic stenosis and the blood is moving this way, then it has to radiate to the carotid, okay, which is here. So radiates to the carotid. Okay, now let's move on to diastole. So S1, S2, S1. We said that this is systole, and this is obviously diastole. Alright, so again, left atrium, left ventricle, very simplistic diagram. So what do we have in diastole? We have, this is diastole, right? The blood is moving, make this bigger, the blood is moving in this direction. So if the blood's moving in this direction, then you'd have a mitral stenosis. So let's talk about mitral stenosis. Mitral stenosis, the blood is coming. We said that when the blood comes down quickly and there's like a narrowing, what happens is you get a click, right? We mentioned that in here. We mentioned that you get an ejection click. It's the same thing happens here. So what you get is a click. Now we're talking about diastole, so remember that you get a click. It actually, in mitral stenosis, it's actually not called a click, it's called an opening snap. So I'm pretty sure it's the same thing, it's just a different name. So just remember that it's an opening snap, okay? And then what you get is basically the blood, because the pressure of the blood is great here, right? So there's, what happens is, and this area is known as the greatest or the highest filling area. So because it's in diastole, the blood has to go to the left ventricle. It's actually the highest area that's filled. So what actually happens is that the blood actually starts off very high, okay, and then goes lower. Alright, so the blood moves and then it starts off very high because this is the highest filling area. What happens is you get something called an atrial kick. So what happens is that this actually contracts, and because it contracts, what happens is that you get more blood moving up. Okay, an atrial kick happens just because there's a little bit more blood and it needs to get rid of it to the left ventricle. What we call it is actually mid-diastolic, okay, because it happens in the mid-diastolic. I probably should have drawn a bit more middle. Okay, that's easy. I can just remove that and do S2. Okay, so mid-diastolic, and it has a weird name. So mid-diastolic rumble. The reason they call it rumble is because it like happens in a weird shape, like a U shape. Okay, but the other thing we can call it is decrescendo, because it happens in a decrescendo shape, which we talked about, plus a pre-systolic crescendo. Pre-systolic crescendo. The last thing we're going to do is a regurgitation of, what else? Good, the aortic regurgitation. The blood is coming down from here, and you get the blood going back. Okay, and what actually happens is because the pressure, so say this is the aorta, okay, the pressure in the aorta, drawn by a big P, is greater than the pressure in the left ventricle. The blood goes back before the blood fills in, straight away. So we call that, what actually happens is early. Okay, so the blood's falling early, diastolic, and then it just stops. Because the pressure here is greater than the pressure here at this point in time, the blood flows and then it just stops. So very easy name, early, diastolic. And again, what's the shape? Decrescendo. So just to recap, we'll start with what we finished with. Regurgitation, early diastolic decrescendo, and we said that because the pressure is greater in the aorta compared to the ventricle. Heard in the upper sternal and the lower sternal when patient is sitting forward. The blood moving down, so we actually hear it in the upper sternal, and if the patient is sitting forward, we would hear it in the lower sternal. And the reason for that is because the blood, gravity basically pushes the blood down if the patient is sitting forward. The reason why we don't hear it in the aorta, by the way, is because we mentioned that the pressure is greater in the aorta, and what happens is that the blood is moving backwards here, so you actually hear the flow, the murmur here. Okay, so make sure you don't confuse that. So we've done that, good. Stenosis of the mitral stenosis in diastole, and we mentioned that it is the highest filling area with an atrial kick. Okay, and that means you get a weird shape like that. Okay, which is a decrescendo plus a pre-systolic crescendo, or you can call it a mid-diastolic murmur. Alright, so that's done. Then we go to the mitral regurg. Mitral regurg is pansystolic, okay, and just one shape, and heard best in the apex, radiates to the axilla. We explained that. You also, a prolapse is important to note because it's the exact same thing, but what you actually get is a mid-systolic click. That's done. Aortic stenosis is a crescendo decrescendo with an ejection click, heard most loudly in the aortic area. If this is still confusing you, I'd recommend you, because in the exam you might not have time to think, just simply remember mitral regurgitation is pansystolic. Just remember that. Mr. P, if that's what you want to remember it. Mr. P, mitral regurg is pansystolic. If you remember that, you can differentiate everything else and you can make up the rest by intuitive thinking. So I hope this helped, because it's definitely a confusing topic and it took me ages to figure it out. And this is not the first time it took me to figure it out. So I hope this helped, and please comment below, subscribe, like, share, and if you have any questions, please let me know. I hope